Folks, just a moment to log in and join. We appreciate your taking some time today to join URU for a very special town hall one. I'm just delighted to be able to present to everyone today. Again, I'm Steve Dandino, and I serve as Executive Director of URU and as Associate Professor at Colorado State University, which has hosted URU since 2013. Again, welcome to all. Delighted that you're here. It's a town hall, so it's recorded. We'll post this our session at URU's website once it's captioned. It usually takes us a little time, so we'll make an announcement of when it's available. Feel free to share this with colleagues, anyone interested, you think, in our topic today. The title is Deans, parenthetically, who are former UVPs, Perspectives on Undergraduate Education. We are absolutely delighted to have so many distinguished colleagues join us today. I turn things over to our moderator, Ben Withers. Benjamin C. Withers, formerly, is Dean of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Iowa State University and served formerly as Associate Provost at the University of Kentucky and Dean of Liberal Arts at Colorado State University. I've known Ben for many years. Ben, thank you so much for moderating today's session. Appreciate it.
Steve, thank you so much for that introduction. Indeed, it's great to be able to work with you again. The genesis of this session is a discussion that Steve and I had, maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago, about how changes in higher education today, especially those focused around changes in federal funding and focuses on diversity, et cetera, puts colleges of arts and sciences particularly in a spotlight. And from that, we began thinking about how lessons that some of us who were UVPs before, the lessons we learned in that position and that we brought back into our colleges. So we thought it would be an extremely interesting opportunity to have a discussion with people who had similar experiences. So with that, we've got a distinguished panel here. I'm going to turn things over to them to introduce themselves, and then I got a series of questions for them. So why don't we start with Aslam? Introduce yourself, and we'll move right ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Aslam Kılıç. I'm the Vice Provost and Founding Dean of our brand new college on campus, College of Emerging and Collaborative Studies. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, but found my way to where I am right now through a department head role and associate dean role in private and public institutions, and happy to be here today.
Great. Kevin, we'll go to you next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Pitts. I'm the Dean of the College of Science at Virginia Tech. My background is as a physicist. Spent much of my career at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and was a UVP at Illinois before coming to Virginia Tech. Great to be here.
Great. And Jeffrey.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jeffrey Schulson. I'm currently Vice Provost for Undergraduate Affairs and Dean of the College at Brandeis University. I have a slightly different trajectory that I can share a lot more details about in the coming questions, but I'm a literary scholar by training and served as Dean of the Arts and Sciences at Brandeis before we did an academic restructuring that I'll say more about in a few minutes.
Great. And Gary, welcome. Glad to have you here. You're last but not least.
All right, well, I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Bennett. I'm currently the Dean of the Trinity College of Arts and Sciences at Duke University. Prior to this role, I was Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. I'm a psychologist by training, and I do digital health research in a range of different chronically ill populations.
Wonderful. So why don't we go back to our panelists in reverse order. So I'm going to start with you, Gary. Tell us a little bit about the decision-making that led you to go from UVP to be interested in becoming a dean.
Yeah, I was really interested in having a job title that didn't need to be explained. That was the first thing. Nailed that. I served for 5 years as Vice Provost and had the honor and pleasure of leading during COVID, and that experience was transformative for me. And if I had any cynicism about the critical role that we in academic leadership positions can play, it was fully disabused during that time, and that got me interested in trying to understand more of the elephant and to be more involved in directing the strategy for the College of Arts and Sciences. As you say, Ben, right now, our commitment to the undergraduate experience is absolutely critical, and the headwinds operating, in opposition to the traditional mode of implementing a strong liberal arts model are greater than they've arguably been in some time. So I wanted to be involved in that work, and fortunately, have the pleasure of doing that every day.
So Jeffrey, as you pointed out, your trajectory is a little different. Explain that for us. How did you happen to enter that trajectory?
Yeah, so I started my career at the University of Miami, where I was for 17 years, and was on the faculty the entire time, though I had some, smaller departmental leadership roles. I came to the University of Connecticut after those 17 years, also to take on a faculty position and to run a small center, research center. But about 5 years into my time at UConn, I was invited by the interim provost at the time, who had been the dean of the college when I was first hired, to take on an interim role in the provost's office as vice provost for interdisciplinary affairs. It was an appealing opportunity because it had an endpoint to it, and I figured I could try it out and see if I liked it. And if I did, I might try to stick around. And if not, I could go back to my faculty job. I liked it enough to decide that I wanted to pursue administrative work a little bit more. And over the course of the next 6 years, or a total of 6 years at UConn, I was in the provost office for all 6 of those years. And I cycled through a number of different roles. We had a lot of turnover in the senior leadership positions. I went from being vice provost for interdisciplinary affairs to vice provost for academic operations, and then became senior vice provost for academic affairs, which I did for the last 2 years I was at UConn. But I was ready at that point for a different kind of challenge. There was another turnover in the provost position and in the president's position, and it was the right time for me to start looking around. And there was a position that came open at Brandeis as the Dean of Arts and Sciences, which was really where I wanted to go next. I talked to a lot of colleagues of mine who had been deans or were serving deans, and often I talked to friends of mine who went on to become college presidents, and almost without exception, they said their favorite academic leadership job that they had while they were on their way through to the presidency was being the dean of a school. And so it was an opportunity that I also wanted to try out, see what it would be like. I felt like I could have more direct impact in an executive function serving as dean. So I threw my hat in for that job at Brandeis and took it, and was able to get the job and took it, and served in that role for 2 years. In the last 7 or 8 months, though, the university has undergone a significant academic reorganization, and I can say more about later. But the result of that reorganization has been to eliminate the job of Dean of Arts and Sciences. We no longer have a School of Arts and Sciences over which there presides a dean. We now have 4 smaller, disciplinarily divided units. We call them schools, but they're not nearly as siloed or divided as the earlier organization was, each of which has a leader we call an academic dean. And my position was eliminated, and I was moved into this position that has sort of an oversight of all 4 of them and the full undergraduate program. And so that's the role that I serve now. So I've kind of gone from being a vice provost to a dean and then back to a vice provost, though in a very different kind of academic context and institution the second time around. I was at UConn, which is a big state institution. Brandeis is a small liberal arts and research private university. And I'm happy to say more about that later, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thanks, Jeffrey. I would like to come back to that later, but Kevin, tell us a little bit about your trajectory.
Thanks, Ben. I have to start with how I got involved in undergraduate programs, and partly because I suspect this might resonate with a handful of folks who've joined us today. I had just been promoted to full professor, and I was somewhat critical of my colleagues in the physics department because I would talk to all these students who wanted to go all these different directions, yet our curriculum was exclusively focused on producing the next generation of faculty. And so, as I said, we really need to make our curriculum a little bit broader. They immediately said, well, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and get involved in an administrative role? And it turned out I really enjoyed it. One other unique aspect of my career is that the physics department, certainly a pure traditional science, happens to live administratively at Illinois in the College of Engineering. So when I became an associate dean, I was in the College of Engineering before becoming a vice provost. Somewhat like Jeffrey, I was very interested in an executive role. I thought I could kind of broaden myself a little bit. After about a year of COVID, I stepped down as vice provost at Illinois and actually took a job as the chief research officer at Fermilab. It's a national laboratory outside of Chicago before I came here to Virginia Tech. And the one thing I'll say about this role, and I know we'll get back to this a little bit later, is, you know, the outward face. I absolutely loved being a vice provost, having an influence on education, but the outward facing aspect of a dean's job is something that I truly, truly enjoy.
Thank you, Kevin. Aslam, how about you?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to hear all the pathways that led my colleagues. And I'll pick on what Gary said and build on that. Gary said that the dean position he didn't need to explain, which is wonderful. I took it a bit further and I tried to find entrepreneurship in higher ed and kind of created my own job on campus. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. But while I was the vice provost, my first charge was, having stepped into the role right when large language models were just making headlines, and having just launched our first intercollegiate data science degree program, I found myself really having a big passion on how does higher ed respond to all this emerging technology in a timely way. And as a result of that charge I took upon as the vice provost of academic affairs, I ended up launching a brand new college, which I'm happy to talk in detail. That's my favorite topic. That actually brings colleges together to work together to create programs that are industry aligned and like I believe Kevin mentioned, not necessarily prepare students for faculty positions, but the future workforce, which is rapidly changing.
Thank you for that. Certainly, we've all had varied experiences of how we got to the place where we are. One of the things we have in common is that we all can look back at the things that we've done and maybe do things a little differently. Gary, when we had a practice session here, you had an example of something that you would have done differently as UVP now that you're dean. What would you tell your younger self?
I want you all to settle in for the next 48 minutes while I tell you all the things that I wish I had said to myself. I suspect we all have a long, long list. You know, I like everyone on this call, when I started the role, I did my listening tour and I engaged with all of the deans and asked them a lot of questions. I now appreciate I didn't ask them the right questions. You know, I think what I wish I had better understood at the time was, you know, really the motivators, the incentives, the drivers that our deans that are thinking about every day, the metrics to which they're actually attending. I wish I understood a bit more about the conversations between dean and provost, what really matters, what kinds of messages they're hearing in that external work. Like at the end of I realized that, you know, I had a very good relationship with my dean when I was vice provost, but I now appreciate I didn't fully understand how to partner with her most effectively. And so the exemplar of that was in this area of advising. Got into my role and quite quickly realized that we had a gap in academic advising. This is for our general education curriculum first 2 years and our liberal arts style experience. And what became, we had a large volunteer workforce of academic advisors of several hundred people. There's roughly 50% churn in that number every year. And with that kind of situation, it's just extremely challenging to ensure any kind of quality or to really maintain any serious accountability. And so I thought it would be, you know, I had a great idea that at least 30 people before me had, which was we needed to shake it up and have a professional advising model. And I came up with what I thought was a great proposal, went on the road, tried to fundraise for it, tried to engage with my deans. I didn't realize, though, the ways in which how to present that. I now appreciate that I didn't present it appropriately for my dean. To really solve the challenges that she was experiencing in her organization. And so fast forward now 5 years later, I didn't expect to be doing the work. I'm still concerned about academic advising. We have really terrific partners in the space. And I'm better positioned to understand how to make the move. And so we made a not insignificant organizational change, and we have now a professional advising model, and it represented the good work of a lot of people here. It's the right thing to do for our students and allows us to ensure a high quality, highly accountable experience, and actually save a little bit of money along the way. But it was really only because at this point, I have a better understanding of how to engage now with my vice provosts to make sure that we are working together to solve some of these problems. So more time, better questions, really understanding what matters for the dean, I think was the primary thing I would tell myself.
Very useful thoughts, Gary. Let me open it up to the other three panelists. Looking with the benefit of hindsight, what advice would you give to yourself in that former role that you've learned now? Who would like to jump in? No advice at all.
I guess I'll,
Aslam, okay, Jeffrey, go ahead, and then we'll go to Aslam.
well, the reason I hesitated is because it's a little bit tricky for me to think about it in relation to the very different institutions where I was working, one as a vice provost, senior vice provost for academic affairs, and then moving to Brandeis as dean. The kind of work that I did at UConn in that role was with 13 different schools and colleges, working with deans who each had their own very ambitious portfolio of activities, endeavors. And I think now retrospectively, having been dean, I understand what they were grappling with in very much the way that Gary is describing what he understood better, now much more than I did at the time. But part of my experience at UConn was doing a lot of what Gary described was also his role prior to this, which was managing our transition out into and out of the COVID lockdown and all of the things that happened there. And for those activities, it required a lot of centralized support. It required just a lot of management that was almost not fully, but necessarily top down, because it was just, we had to have certain kinds of protocols in place. There were safety issues. There were significant budgetary implications. There were a whole variety of things that were going to be much more effectively handled centrally than if they had been distributed amongst the schools. When we came out of COVID, and we're trying to move back to sort of the new normal, as it were, I had to learn how to kind of step back a little bit and give the deans a little more space to forge ahead individually with the particular goals and plans that they had, and provide the support where that was relevant, but also respect their domains, respect their areas of expertise and understanding. And I tried to take some of that understanding into the role that I took on at Brandeis as dean. The difference, of course, is that Brandeis, I was dean of arts and sciences, which was 80% of the university. We had 10% was a small business school and 10% was a school of social policy. So I was kind of the big elephant in the room for most of the senior leadership conversations in ways that none of the deans necessarily were in my other roles. So part of it is adjusting to a new role, but in my case also, it was about adjusting to a very different culture and a very different institutional makeup that I had to learn to navigate differently. So I don't know how helpful that answer is, really.
No, I think it's very helpful. Thank you, Jeffrey. I want to go, Steve put in the chat an invitation for our panel, for our people joining us here. If you've got a question for the panel, put it in chat and I'll work it into our questions here. I'm going to come to you with another question here, Kevin, about general advice for our UVPs. But first, Aslam, do you have a bit of advice that you would have given yourself in a previous role?
I have a lot of advice that I could give myself, but I'll try to summarize a few. I think the realization of the vice provost role is more of a connector than anything else is very important. It's delicate to understand your provost's expectations, the dean's priorities, and connecting the dot between all of that, understanding the challenges that stand in front of the way. And I think a good way for a vice provost to get connected to the dean's mission is actually having a good relationship with their associate deans of undergraduate, associate deans, and directors of advising. Those are the boots on the ground, and having a trusted relationship will help you understand the actual challenges that they are facing. And I think if on a day-to-day basis, if it feels difficult, everything is as it should be. It's good to have a sense of humor. The dean's job is as easy as it is to explain. It's a very complex job, right? They are handling competing priorities sometimes. So I think hard conversations and sometimes healthy tension is inevitable. And actually, it's a good thing. If we are not experiencing that, I think we are not making progress. So embracing that mode of operation, it's okay. We'll have disagreements. That's how we grow. And approaching it with a sense of humor would be great.
Sense of humor is very important. I agree. This is a good transition to that more general question. And I remember, Kevin, that in our practice session, you had some good thoughts about general advice for people currently in UVPs about how best to interact with people in dean's roles. Can you share some of those thoughts?
Yeah, and I probably won't come anywhere near what I said last time, but hopefully this is still helpful. And I actually like to build a little bit on what Gary was saying, because I think my answer would be very similar to his, that I probably didn't ask the right questions. However, what I did do as vice provost, and what I would definitely recommend others do, I suspect this is pretty natural, kind of human nature. Identify the folks who you can work with, and make progress by doing that. It's true that it's not exactly the same as identifying incentives and understanding what drives everybody, but yet you can know who you're going to make progress with, and making progress with folks is always a good thing. And so I say, in hindsight, I'm glad that I took that approach. I could have been more efficient about it, could have been more effective, but overall, I think we made a lot of progress exactly because we were identifying folks to work with. The other piece of advice I think I would really give, which I think is maybe certainly something, at least time, and I think also a little bit of distance has helped me, certainly as I work with other deans. Serving in the provost office, serving as a vice provost, gives you a perspective on the campus overall that is very difficult to attain anywhere else. This is both in understanding the nuances of different disciplines across campus, also how the institution works beyond the college level. I'm remembering back when I was a vice provost, I kind of assumed that deans had that same level of campus over insight, if you will, overall. They don't in general. And I can tell you that as I work with my colleagues now in our Council of College Deans, in general, of course, they worry very much about their own college. Of course, they understand some of the broader perspective, but not the way a vice provost does. So I would absolutely embrace the opportunity you have and the advantage that you have and you have gained in serving in this role.
That's great. Gary and Jeffrey, would you add anything to what we've heard from Özlem or Kevin?
Oh, the point that Kevin just made is so resonant for me. I have a very different view of the elephant that is the university than my other dean colleagues, and it helps most days of the week. I certainly feel like I have a better sense of how the sausage is made, to whom I should turn, to whom I should really turn, a sense of the interpolitics to help the us to be able to execute on our ambitions. I will say there are times when it's a hindrance as well. And that is, having this wide purview in some respects makes me much more, or how should I say, differently empathetic to the challenges that my senior colleagues are experiencing. That can be. There are times when I have learned that I need to advocate more strongly as a dean, and understanding the way that the provost office works is not exactly. By better understanding the way provost works, I actually understand what's happening on the other side, and I still need to push. And that has been really important. It's also been challenging in working with faculty, because you have an understanding often of the way that the finances and operations of the university operate. You can explain things in a way that I think my faculty colleagues aren't used to deans explaining things, and that can be very, very helpful, particularly in promoting real and perceived transparency. But also, it sometimes makes you look like you're a little too close to what's happening in very senior administration, and I think just in terms of dealing with governance, I found that to be both helpful and also challenging at times.
And Jeffrey, I want to ask you about your structure, but go ahead and give us a few words from your perspective.
Yeah, no, I think Kevin and Gary and Özlem have really captured a lot of the same things that I've experienced. I'll just add one other element that I think is maybe not as obvious, but I found very helpful. And Kevin, you were talking about the outward facing role that the dean has, which is not something that typically vice provosts tend to have. We're much more inward focused. And having had the experience of first being a vice provost and then becoming a dean, when I was in that more outward facing role, especially when I was doing development work, I found that it was very useful to be able to provide a broader understanding of the structure and operations of the institution when I was talking to a prospective donor about a particular project that we were working on. I could give them some insight into how this would impact the broader institution, because typically donors, at least in my experience, they're not really that interested in one sector of the institution over another. They have a particular project they might be interested in supporting, or a particular area, but the sort of inside baseball that we all now have internalized is less important to them. And I found that as a dean, in trying to make the case for support for the school, I was able to frame those arguments or those discussions in ways that helped to kind of broaden the view of the institutional aspirations and how they fit in, how what I was trying to do fit into the broader efforts that the institution was aiming for.
Jeffrey, and as I said, to build on what you just said, universities have structure, but so do colleges have their distinct structure. You are involved in an interesting approach at Brandeis, and then I want to come to Özlem and ask you about your college, your school. But Jeffrey, tell us first a little bit more detail about what you're involved in now.
Yeah, so we had a presidential transition almost exactly a year ago, and the new president who came in initially, he was appointed as interim. He's now his position has been converted to a more permanent position. His name is Arthur Levine. Decided that we needed a little bit of shaking up at the institution. We were kind of in a bit of a rut. We had some issues with enrollment and other elements of the institution were very heavily tuition dependent, and we were seeing some evidence that our traction with the newer community of students applying to schools was flagging, and we needed to figure out what we could do to liven things up. And so after about 2 or 3 months or maybe 4 months of having conversations across the institution, the president then came to the senior leadership that included the deans and a number of other associate provosts and said, we need to do something significant to kind of reframe ourselves and reimagine the liberal arts proposition we offer for undergraduates. And so the outcome of that was a decision, as I said before, to collapse all of the 3 main schools into a single academic structure that would then be reorganized around 4 disciplinary-based, we call them schools, but what distinguishes each of them is that they combine the more traditional academic fields of a particular area and modes of application. So we now have a School of Arts, Humanities, and Culture, a School of Business and Economics, a School of Social Science and Social Policy, and a School of Science, Technology, and Engineering. And the expectation, the hope is that this is going to help us to create and innovate academic programs that will allow students, we can still lean into our identity as a very strong liberal arts institution, but that we're much more explicit in thinking about career readiness and how we're preparing students once they graduate to go on to lead productive and successful lives as professionals. And it was interesting for me to see the materials that just got circulated about the conference that's coming up next week in San Antonio, how much of we've been sent is very much about what we're talking about right now. What I'm doing right now in my new role as Vice Provost for Undergraduate Affairs is leading the efforts to redesign our core education so that it is much more explicitly tied to core competencies and career readiness. And so this is also part of that same effort between the academic programs that we're trying to develop that are a function of these new structures and this new Brandeis core that we're developing. It's about being much more intentional, overt, giving our students the language to be able to talk about their education in terms of the kinds of skills and competencies that they're mastering while they're in college, so they can go on to more productive lives afterwards. That's a very, very quick encapsulation of what has been a much more complicated process.
I can only imagine. Özlem, tell us about the emerging and collaborative studies at Tennessee.
That is my favorite topic, Ben. KEX, as we call it in short, launched in response to how a modern land-grant institution should look like, as the relevance of higher ed was getting in the headline news, while the emerging tech, as I will go back to, is shaping the landscape of future economies. And as the students enter college, by the time they graduate, the degrees or the careers they thought they would pursue may not even exist. So we are operating in a time scale that's a lot faster than higher ed is accustomed to respond. So KEX, we call it as a startup in higher education because it was meant to come in with agile structure and leveraging campus resources, not necessarily creating something new every time a new emerging technology shapes a new career, but leveraging intercollegial expertise on campus to really prepare curriculum that prepares students for the careers of the future, for gainful employment and rewarding careers in real time. So it was a response to AI, it was a response to cyber, it was a response to data science, and it's going to be a response to quantum computing. So hence the name Emerging, not Emerged. I tell my team we will always be looking forward because this time scale of change is shrinking. So it's a responsible reaction to hire it, to say we need to do things differently. We need to have structures that enable us to take action and curriculum in a way where we can work together, break down the silos, which was a major challenge in our institution, and I'm sure in any institution, where sometimes resources and revenue models depend on who's graduating, how many students or student credit hours, telling our campus that we need to wear our university hats as we develop new curriculum on what a degree on AI should look like for everyone. Not just for an engineer, because engineers can do that, but these skill sets will require everyone to talk together and have a very close partnership with industry as a brand new college, offer them a blank page to help us design the curriculum with us, and enable students experience workforce early on as of their first year. What does it look like to do AI in business, in health sector, for them to gain experiences early on to actually shape their own careers as we figure out what's going to happen in the next 4 years together with them.
Thank you. I want to pivot over here to Kevin and Gary. But first, again, I want to encourage people, if you've got a question, put it in the chat. If you'd like to observe or make a comment on some of the things we're hearing from panelists, please go ahead and put it in the chat. So Kevin and Gary, the colleges we lead are a little bit more traditional in structure, but we're also addressing many of the areas that Jeffrey and Özlem were talking about. Going with you first, Kevin, what are some of the major issues in undergraduate education that you are working on, and how do you work with UVPs in those areas?
So one of the issues we have specifically at Virginia Tech and the College of Science with a large engineering college is a lot of our foundational coursework, calculus, chemistry, physics, for a large number of science and engineering majors. And of course, we have seen considerable changes in student body composition and preparation related to the pandemic, related to going to test optional, things like that. So we've been working very hard, certainly with our undergraduate vice provost. Many of you know for many years Rachel Holloway, who recently retired. Sorry to see Rachel go, but Jill Seibel now has stepped into her role. And for example, one of the things we were working on was a set of kind of what I would refer to as on-ramp courses for math preparation. Of course, you know how all of you know how this works for the STEM majors, and that is, if you haven't successfully navigated Calculus 1 at the end of the first semester of your freshman year, you are behind schedule. And therefore, for students who need a little extra help, we've developed some additional coursework, co-instruction, all of the things that you talk about. I was able to bring to the dean's office, and then also working with the UVP and others on campus, I think we've been able to make quite a bit of progress in that regard. And then the other thing I would say about this, of course, and this is true, I think, of many of our institutions, we're undergoing significant enrollment growth. So trying to scale all of those same concepts to more and more students continues to be a challenge for us, and is something that we're working very hard to try to keep up with.
Thank you. Gary, how about you?
Yeah, so indeed, we are a reasonably traditional arts and sciences college. We have 3 divisions: arts and humanities, social sciences, natural sciences. We are educated about 80% of Duke's undergraduates, the remainder from our School of Engineering, with whom I partner very, very closely. It's interesting. Our 2 presidents ago was a guy called Dick Broadhead, who had been dean of the college at Yale, and a good friend and colleague, a mentor of mine. And he sought to create a dean of the college style model position here at Duke when he arrived. And so By accretion, he created the vice provost of undergraduate education, and then many of the units that were in my school, College of Arts and Sciences, went into the vice provost role, particularly those that served, which served the entire university. And Jeff, you're better for it, I'm sure. Although I'm sure he probably, if he marked up your papers the way he will mark up anything I sent him, we both should get together and have a drink. But I'll tell you, it's been a model for us to have a close partnership between the vice provost and the dean, because there were so many common units there over the years. And so it's and in fact, our new vice provost is familiar to many of you, Lee Baker, who's also an academic mentor of mine, and who was here just a moment ago. So I'm very excited to have him as a partner. So I've already mentioned advising. We passed the Duke's first new general education curriculum in 20 years last year, and so we are working hard to implement it, and that's a significant lift with and among primarily our faculty, with a lot of support from the vice provost's office. Very proud of the way that's been lifted. The other thing is we're a need blind institution, and so our commitment to financial aid represents one of my largest expenses every year, and the financial aid rolls up to the vice provost's office, and so I have the luxury of and real honor of working very closely with that team for the last 5 years. But it does represent this interesting kind of balance of the need and fundamental commitment to affordability and accessibility in an environment like ours, which is really shared between the two roles. The management of the unit is in the vice provost's office, but the dean effectively is paying for it through the budget, and so it requires a high degree of integration and alignment, and that happens every day, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of in our organization.
A lot of what you all are describing is very similar to what we're seeing here at Iowa State. The difference is we're a Midwestern public land-grant university. So enrollment is one of our major concerns. We're seeing people going into engineering and business as opposed to traditional liberal arts disciplines. We're also seeing people decide to go other places than Midwestern public universities. So recruitment's a big thing that we're working on. We just instituted a brand new career-directed course. All of our students have to take that. Another issue that we're facing here is that Iowa State is an extremely decentralized campus. We have 7 colleges, and we have a responsibility-centered budget model where we all basically float on our own boat to a large degree, and to the extent that they even have their own general education requirements. So being able to articulate the role of a large arts and sciences college in a place like this is one of the challenges that we're facing, and something that I think is very important for all of us, being able to explain why higher education is an important thing for people to invest their time and treasure in. Certainly that's a conversation across. So let me stop there for a moment and ask this broader question. Is recruitment and retention, which took up so much of my time as UVP, is it still something that you all are focusing on? I didn't hear you mention that in the conversations here. Anyone like to jump in on that one?
Well, it wasn't so much, I would say that when I was dean, it was definitely on my radar as something that I needed to pay attention to. And so, the challenges that Kevin was describing around the calc classes and those kind of initial hurdles that if students don't get past, it really doesn't set them up for a great success. That was something that we were already aware of and trying to direct resources to the math sequence, the intro physics sequence, the intro chem sequence. We have a lot of students who come to Brandeis wanting to be, saying they're going to be pre-med, and a lot of them end up not being pre-med, but there's a huge initial demand on a lot of those classes. So I was aware of it, and we tried to direct resources towards it. But now in my new role, my current role, which is the UVP, it's very much what I think about. And in fact, I'm hiring a new retention person. We just launched the search this past week, someone whose focus will be exclusively on success and retention. But again, my experience is slightly different than the other 3 panelists, the 4 of you who are now in the dean position. So I'd be curious to hear what you all would say too.
Could I just interject one thing?
Yeah.
I have a 90-10 rule for pre-meds. That is 90% of life science majors are pre-meds on intake. 10% of them are going to med school on graduation.
Yeah, I think that's about the same number we've got here.
I'll provide proper attribution when I use that later today.
That's different than the 80-20 rule, right? Aslam, tell us about recruitment and retention.
So as a large land grant institution, we really benefit from two vice provost roles. In addition to vice provost for academic affairs, we have one responsible for enrollment management, and they do a great job really. And the other is responsible for student success, and they do a great job with retention rates. So we have benefited from, I think, those successful operations where our enrollment numbers are constantly on the rise. Applications have actually doubled in the last decade. So I think having dedicated professionals that can help with branding and when you recruit the students also help with their success has been very important for a land grant institution. And in my vice provost for academic affairs role, I didn't have to really focus on that, but I was part of the discussions for strategic enrollment management plans. As a dean now, I'm very much interested in recruitment and retention, but the hard work is done by really by our enrollment management office to bring the students to campus. Another thing we are doing though is again with the land grant access mission, and also I'll tie back to this emerging tech and the new careers and new economies being developed. I think access to these skills are important. So we are also investing in online education significantly to make sure as a land grant, again, every Tennessean has access, and hopefully we'll expand this to the nation as well.
Great, thank you. So backing up or taking a broader view for a moment, we've talked about our own connections with the provost office. We've talked about how it's been impactful in our career trajectories. We've talked about some of the issues around undergraduate education where UVPs are particularly important partners. If we were to give some advice to the people listening today who are UVPs, as they go back to their campus to work with deans, what are one or two things that we would want to leave them with? What would we recommend that they do in order to strengthen their relationship with deans across different colleges? Kevin, you're shaking your head. We'll start with you.
Thanks, Ben. You know, I was thinking about this a little bit in the context, back to kind of a little bit of the earlier question, which is what are some of the benefits of having served in a vice provost role? And I think that kind of circles back to your question because you know, a couple of things that I'm able to bring to the dean's position, and I think this is also potentially helpful for folks who are still in the provost's office, is one is an appreciation for the importance, first of all, of the overall educational mission, which and of course we all care very deeply about that. But even in the things that deans do every day, for example, when it's fundraising. We're typically talking to alums whose primary affinity to the institution is through their education, not through our research program, even though we care very deeply about our research. So, you know, to be able to talk that language and to talk to them about what their educational experience was, even if it was more than a few years ago, is quite helpful. And the other thing I would add, and I think this gets maybe more directly to your question, is one of the things I'm able to bring to the dean's position is an appreciation for our non-tenure track faculty who are carrying the lion's share of the load in many cases for the educational mission, especially in these introductory courses I was talking about earlier, and how absolutely crucial they are to our mission. And that where I circle back to kind of what can vice provosts do, I think that's a place where working with the dean and helping them understand and identifying ways to acknowledge, to support, provide professional development for the non-tenure track faculty, because I promise you, the tenure track faculty, especially the senior tenured faculty, are in the dean's ear every day asking for resources anyway. It's the non-tenure track faculty that can really benefit from very modest investments, from modest amounts of support, and it can be transformational for the educational program. So to the degree that you can work with deans, help them appreciate that, and also help them appreciate how small things can make big differences is really can make a difference.
Good points. Gary, what would you add to what Kevin has said?
I shouldn't try to add anything. That's completely brilliant, and I couldn't agree more. You know, I'd say that it's really, you know, I think it's important for part of what I'm thinking here is that I've learned in this role that the privilege of being a vice provost in so many respects is what we've described earlier. It's the purview, it's understanding the interconnectedness of the institution, and I would suggest engaging with the dean as a problem solver, as the kind of, you know, I think sitting with a dean and trying to understand, you know, what are the issues that most deans, particularly in my kinds of schools, care deeply about the undergraduate mission, and yet I didn't think, I thought I was the only one who had faculty in my office asking for resources, Kevin. So thank you for that. That's wonderful. But we do, and so it means that we don't have the time to be able to get to those critical aspects of the mission as frequently as we might like. And so a vice provost can be an extraordinarily important partner in getting some of that work done. One of the reasons I'm excited to have our new vice provost is that we work very close. I know we will work very closely together. We have a shared mission. We just have different types of workload, and he'll be able to carry some things that I feel really deeply about. I'm also going to make this very pragmatic suggestion, and that is, this is, you know, our model, as I described earlier, was one where the vice provost office was created largely out of the dean's office. And one of the lingering traditions there was that the vice provost sat on the leadership team for the dean of arts and sciences. It's a very interesting model. I mean, I literally sat around the table while the college is having conversations about faculty hiring and retention and all of the various issues, departmental issues, pragmatic issues of one sort or another. And what it allowed for is a little bit of cross-calibration. The vice provost could bring into the room issues that were related to the sort of provostial level and the university level, and that was useful both for the dean, but also for the whole leadership team. And then correspondingly, the vice provost had a better understanding of what was really happening on the ground, particularly as it related to the faculty. I don't know that the vice provost needs to be at every meeting, but I think that kind of actual formal integration into the leadership structure is something that our university has benefited from greatly.
You're muted, Ben. Ben, you're muted. Ben.
There we go. Pressing the button and it didn't work that time. So Jeffrey, I'm going to ask you to address that question. And to the rest of the panelists, we've got a very interesting question in the chat. Take a look at that, and one of the other three volunteer to address that question. But Jeffrey, tell us what advice that you would give for people going back and working with deans.
Oh,
now it's your turn to be.
No, I would endorse what Kevin and Gary both offered, because I think that's really sage advice. And I would just add one, perhaps another kind of practical suggestion, which is, I think probably we've all had the experience when we've tried to push forward some kind of initiative or develop some kind of alternative approach to something that we're most successful when we have allies within the units where we're working who are kind of part of the helping to be part of the solution. What we call change agents sometimes, and I think especially at the larger institutions that some of us work at or have worked at, it may not be that easy for a vice provost sitting in the provost's office to know who those people are on the ground in individual schools. And so the dean can be a really good resource for identifying those people. And to connect this back to what Kevin was saying, often those folks are not the tenure line faculty. They're what we call at Brandeis the OTS faculty, or the teaching faculty, the faculty who do a lot more of the teaching, or are much more engaged in curricular development, and who understand the importance of and value of some of these changes or some of these initiatives in ways that the folks who are really focused on their research much more so may not. So I would just suggest that as an undergraduate vice provost, if you are trying to push forward some new initiative that's meant to support undergraduate curriculum, undergraduate success, ask your deans for advice about who in the departments are going to be your allies. Who are the people that you need on your team as you work towards these things, and engage them early and have them be part of the effort from all the way through.
Great points, Jeffrey. So Kevin, Özlem, Gary, any of you would like to address the question that we have in the chat?
I'll take a shot. Having served in the vice provost role and now seeing the demands on a dean role, I think it's really important, and it's a power, it's a strength. I don't want to look at the question as whether it's a handicap that you may be seen as too close to the leadership, because I think that enables one to serve as the translator that we often need, even when we bring multiple disciplines together, right? We say things, but it has different meaning. Having seen what hard work goes in the provost's office, especially by staff and support units, which sometimes aren't well understood, especially in RCM models, and translate their function and importance to the faculty is powerful. If you can do that as a dean, maybe we can overcome us versus them, which should never happen. Those who are in academic leadership roles, provost, vice provost, have come from faculty, have been in the trenches, right? So trying to establish that bridge, and then we are all in it together and translate the needs between the different units, I think is an advantage that hopefully those of us who have had the advantage can leverage.
Just building on that a little bit, I was struck by this question because in my vice provostial role, student affairs was probably my closest professional partner. We worked together hand in hand in the pandemic, and also fully revising our residential experience, something I had no familiarity with before that partnership, and I would not have to engage really very much at all with student affairs in my dean's role. And that has been a very palpable change for me, and a concerning one, to be quite clear, because I learned to have deep respect for the work of my colleagues there, and deep appreciation for the ways that they saw students that in some ways differed from my experience as a classroom instructor. So I've been working actually to try to find ways to build the partnership with them as dean, and trying to find space for that. And Aslam's point is really helpful in it. In my experience, many issues related to international students, issues related to that roll up to visa issues, and at our student level are actually part of the domain of student affairs here. And so over the past year, I've tried to leverage that prior relationship to introduce those colleagues to my faculty, particularly my chairs, as a resource, but also to have them sort of demonstrate their expertise, in front of our chairs in ways that will help to build, hopefully, both respect, but also connection, relationship with colleagues there and elsewhere. So I think Aslam's point is really the important one. Having been a vice provost, again, gives you purview, gives you connection, and if you have the desire to be in a dean's role, leveraging that, I think, can be very effective.
This is a great question. Kevin, Jeffrey, any quick takes on this before we move to our last question? I'll just amplify what Gary said. Part of my situation is I recently moved here to Iowa State, so I haven't got lengthy connections with people here. But when I was in Kentucky, I was in the same building as the dean of students and people on the interfraternity, sorority councils. So I had very close relationships. But as I moved into the dean's office, there was less opportunity for those connections, except for conversations during COVID, and also on committees focused on retention. So I think that there are some things that we all can do to improve those relationships, because they are vital. We all are here to serve those undergraduate students, to serve our graduate students in meaningful ways. So we've got about 5 minutes left here. I want to step back yet again and ask our panelists if anyone on this call here has an interest in stepping into a role that's similar to ours, either being a dean or moving back into the provost office like Jeffrey, what 1 or 2 words of advice would you give them as they work on preparing their skill sets and their experiences to be a successful leader of an academic unit? Let's start with you, Jeffrey.
Well, I think one of the functions we've already talked about this a little bit. One of the functions that a dean serves, which is not all that common for someone who has an undergraduate vice provost role, is in development and in kind of external facing activities. So to the extent that you can find ways to get some of that experience, and I don't think anyone expects you to be fully formed in that way if you're a candidate for a deanship, but I think that it would be useful to be able to talk intelligently about what kinds of skills that involves, to gesture to any kinds of experiences that you might have had that have given you some sense of what that work is about. That I think would always be productive and can help you to make the case that that very important function that you serve as dean. And I used to say that a dean has got to be spending at least 30 or 40%, if not more, of their time on development. And so it's a significant aspect of the remit of the position to be able to talk about it in an informed way, have conversations with colleagues who do it, maybe get to know some of the folks in your development office. Those might be useful things to do.
Great point. Let's go Aslam, and then we'll go Kevin and Gary, and then we'll wrap this up.
So Ben, as an engineer, I would say communication is the most important skill set, and whether you have it or not, you have to work on it to get it. And I think the dean role is a lot more about people in many ways, whether it's students, whether it's faculty, whether it's our industry partners or potential donors. It's really about those relationships and the meanings you find in those relationships. But I'll end with saying it's the best job on campus. So go for it if you are interested in it.
Kevin.
Okay. At the risk of getting myself in trouble, someone asked me recently, one of our alums asked me recently, kind of, is there anything about the job that really surprises me? And I said, I served as an associate dean, I served as a vice provost. I had a pretty good sense of what the job was. But then I had to admit that I actually hugged people much more than I ever expected I would. And I don't mean that in an inappropriate way. I mean alums and things like that. I never imagined that the dean did that much hugging. So anyway, that was one thought. When it comes to the position, I will say, and this is based more on my own experience, it may be relevant for some of you. I was an associate department head, an associate dean, a vice provost. And as you well know, many of our faculty colleagues have a blueprint in their mind for whether it's a dean or a provost or whatever. I was seen as someone who had a breadth of experience, but did not have executive experience. So I would suggest anything that you can do, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a position per se, but anything that you can do to identify yourself as having a kind of a role that is kind of the boss of something, if you will, I think is very helpful, that you can point to being in a role where you are nominally the executive.
Gary, last but not least again.
Well, I appreciate that. I tell you, I just learned I'm going to have to go out here and do some more hugging in the building to get this job right. I appreciate that, Kevin. I'm not sure people out in the hallway do, but we'll see what we can do. I'll just a few thoughts. I think the most important advice I ever got about academic leadership, I got from an old professor of religion, a guy called Hans Hillebrand, who'd been a provost 1.5 million years ago, and he lived in the dream. He went back to his faculty position and was teaching classes, and I wandered up to him and we had a long conversation, and at the end of it, he said, the most important thing you can do if you want to be an academic leader at any level is to tell someone. And I think all of us know that intuitively in our leadership roles, that it's none of us expected to be doing this work, none of us trained for this. You have to tell someone, and that advocacy function on the back end of having shared your aspirations is really what helps to really make these things possible. So that was the first thing, and I think that's especially important for those of you who are interested in the dean's role. As Kevin noted, it's not the expected progression. The second thing I'd say is do, in addition to executive leadership experience, engage with the faculty from a leadership perspective. All of us know what it's like to be faculty, to be in a department, even if you've been a chair. It's a very, very different animal than leading the faculty as their dean. And so whether if it's a committee or a new initiative or a new project that's been ceded to you from the provost or the dean, something where you can engage faculty and make something happen will be great training.
Well, I'm impressed with all of your answers. Your institutions are certainly very lucky to have you in leadership positions. The wisdom and the experience that you all have is exemplary, I think, of the directions for your institutions in higher education. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us. I recognize some names over here. Gwen Gorzelski, I'll give you a shout out. Been a while since I've seen that name. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you to end our session.
Oh, thank you, Ben. On behalf of everyone who's joined today, many great thanks to our panel. Even a big virtual hug to you all. It's really kind of you, very generous to share these remarks and to, offer advice to URU members. We'll share this back with lots more folks who will benefit from the recording. But again, thanks to those who joined. and participated in the conversation. Thanks especially to our panel and to you, Ben, for helping organize it. We're really very grateful. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you soon.